Perhaps no one will ever truly know what happens behind the closed doors of another family. But one story unfolded so unexpectedly and with such intensity that it shocked even the most experienced detectives. In the early hours of September 22nd, 2020, a distressing call was made to emergency services. A man, breathless with fear, reported finding his wife, Maria Munoz, unconscious and unable to wake her. The paramedics arrived within minutes, but there was nothing they could do. Maria was already gone. However, behind the appearance of a sudden tragedy lay a dark and complex story far more disturbing than anyone could have guessed. Maria Munoz's story started out like a fairy tale, with every indication that it would have a happy ending. But something went wrong. She was successful in her career, became a happy wife and mother, but at some point, her husband started seeing someone else and did not want to let go of either of the women. Maria endured this for years, hoping to save her marriage for the sake of the children, but it all ended in tragedy. Maria Isabel Munoz was born on August 18, 1989, in a small town called Peñuelas, located in the southern part of Puerto Rico. She was the youngest child in a simple, modest family. She did well in school and dreamed from a young age of a career in medicine, wanting to save lives and help others. After finishing school, Maria became a student at a prestigious medical university. During her studies, she met a young doctor named Joel P., who was completing his residency. Despite being almost 11 years older than her, they quickly developed tender feelings for each other, and soon a romantic relationship blossomed. The couple began living together, and after some time, Joel officially proposed, and Maria said yes. In 2011, the couple moved together to the United States, settling in Laredo, Texas, on the border with Mexico. They both got jobs at the same hospital, where Maria was hired as a nurse anesthetist, and Joel became a surgical assistant, helping during operations. Both continued to study to improve their qualifications, earning a decent income that allowed them to live comfortably, buy a spacious house in a nice neighborhood, and own 2 cars. In 2015, the couple had their first child, a boy named Alejandro, and in 2018, Maria gave birth to a daughter, Valentina. After the children were born, the young mother decided to temporarily leave her job and fully focus on raising the little ones and running the household. Nevertheless, she planned to return to work and renew her medical license once the kids got a bit older. Maria and Joel appeared to be a happy, harmonious couple. They loved each other, raised their children together, and their financial situation allowed them to live comfortably without having to restrict themselves. It seemed like they had no problems living their best lives, but behind the facade of an ideal family, a real drama was unfolding, one that most people close to them never suspected. The mysterious death of a young mother in the early hours of September 22nd, 2020, began when an anxious man called emergency services, reporting that he had found his wife unconscious. He tried to revive her, but she showed no signs of life. The caller was Joel, and he urgently requested that a medical team be sent to his home as quickly as possible to try to save his beloved. Less than 10 minutes later, a patrol car and an ambulance arrived at the couple's house. The door was opened by a man dressed in blue surgical scrubs, which was already unusual. He simply shouted for the responders to follow him and rushed upstairs to the bedroom where 31-year-old Maria lay on the floor. She wasn't breathing, and there was no detectable pulse, but her body was still warm. Joel claimed that he had performed continuous CPR and chest compressions for almost 20 minutes, but it hadn't worked. The paramedics also attempted to resuscitate her, but all their efforts were in vain. Maria was pronounced dead. When authorities asked Joel what he thought could have happened, he suggested that his wife might have taken a large dose of powerful medication, which could have been fatal. The paramedics immediately inquired if she had been dependent on any restricted substances, but Joel denied this, emphasizing that she had never dabbled in anything of that sort. However, he admitted that Maria had recently been struggling with severe depression and anxiety, and a doctor had prescribed her medication for it. Joel speculated that his wife might have accidentally taken more than the prescribed dose, leading to a tragic outcome. He quickly added that it was also possible Maria, in a state of deep distress and depression, chose to end her own life. He mentioned that she had brought up this topic in a conversation just the day before, but at the time, he hadn't taken her words seriously. The police asked Joel to show them the medication Maria had been taking. He went to the bathroom and returned with a nearly full bottle of pills. This struck the officers as odd since, in cases where someone ends their life by overdosing on medication, it's unusual for the pills to be neatly put away afterward. Yet there were no empty bottles, blister packs, or any containers visible near the body or anywhere in the room. The bottle Joel presented was almost full, suggesting that if Maria had taken any pills, it was a very small amount. Such a dose was unlikely to be fatal, but nothing could be concluded with certainty just yet. To get answers, an autopsy and a toxicology report would be necessary to determine what was in her system at the time of death. While the paramedics attempted to revive Maria and the police examined the scene, 5-year-old Alejandro and 2-year-old Valentina were peacefully asleep in a nearby room, completely unaware of the tragedy unfolding just steps away. Joel mentioned that he had already contacted his relatives, who were prepared to take care of the children temporarily until everything could be sorted out. What was wrong with Joel? Despite all efforts, the medical team was unable to save the young woman and mother of 2. The real cause of her passing remained unknown, but in the meantime, the police needed to thoroughly interview Joel, the only person who had been present during the incident. The grieving widower, who immediately became the prime suspect in the case, Joel was taken to the station for questioning, and everyone who saw him that day noted his unusual and erratic behavior. Of course, it could have been attributed to shock and the pain of loss, but nearly everything about him seemed suspicious, from his appearance and clothing to his words and gestures. For one, he was sweating profusely, so much so that his clothes were soaked through and clung to his body. Secondly, why was Joel wearing surgical scrubs in the middle of the night at home when he wasn't even scheduled for a shift? Thirdly, his movements were frantic and exaggerated, as if he was on edge, constantly jumping up from his seat like a puppet on strings. His statements were scattered and inconsistent, further raising doubts. All of this led authorities to suspect that he might have been under the influence of substances that could cause excessive sweating and heightened nervous agitation. Moreover, Joel seemed unaware that he was fidgeting with something small and crinkly in his hand. It turned out to be packaging from a catheter needle, the kind typically used for injecting substances into smaller veins. When the officers asked him what he was holding, Joel casually replied that it was just trash. Another odd detail was that Joel discreetly took and hid the pill bottle prescribed to his wife, the same one he had earlier brought from the bathroom to show the police. When asked where the medication had gone, he feigned surprise and claimed he had no idea. However, the officers were equipped with body cameras, and one of them had recorded the moment when Joel quietly pocketed the bottle. When they showed him the footage, Joel appeared embarrassed and eventually handed over the medication, saying that he might have grabbed it unconsciously due to the shock. Joel then began to explain that he and his wife had been going through a rough patch, balancing on the edge of divorce. He admitted that they hadn't been living together for several months, but hardly anyone among their relatives, friends, or colleagues knew about it. According to him, this situation had developed due to Maria's mental health struggles and oppressive state. He claimed that he frequently visited the house to stay connected with the children, whom he missed dearly, and that he was also trying to reconcile with Maria to save their marriage. The widower stated that on the evening before the tragic incident, he had come to see his family, spent time with the kids, and after they went to bed, he and Maria had a long conversation, According to him, they cleared the air, reconciled, and later were intimate. He claimed that afterward, he went to take a shower, and when he returned to the bedroom, he found Maria unconscious. At first, he thought she had fallen asleep, but when he realized she wasn't responding and had stopped breathing, he immediately called emergency services and began trying to revive her. He could not explain why he had been wearing surgical scrubs at home that night. The autopsy revealed no clear answers. There were no visible signs of injury or struggle on Maria's body. She had passed away shortly before the medics arrived, as her body was still warm, but the entire situation and circumstances felt very peculiar. Initially, there were 3 possible explanations: a voluntary act, a tragic accident, or a deliberate crime, which could not yet be ruled out. Joel insisted that on that fateful night, he and his wife had been intimate about half an hour before the incident, but experts found no evidence on Maria's body to support this. So, it seemed Joel had lied. But why? Perhaps he wanted to create the impression that they had reconciled and were planning to get back together, even though that might not have been the case. The autopsy showed that Maria's stomach was empty, but if Joel's account was to be believed, she had taken medication while he was in the shower, which, according to him, lasted no more than 10 minutes. Afterward, he tried to resuscitate her and called emergency services, but Maria was already gone. However, no medication could dissolve that quickly or act instantaneously to cause the death of a young, healthy woman. Despite this, experts confidently stated that the cause of death was poisoning from an unknown substance, which led to severe intoxication, respiratory failure, and paralysis of the heart muscle. The medical examiner noticed a small puncture mark on the inside of Maria's arm, near the elbow, resembling a precise injection from a very fine needle. However, the puncture was on her right arm, in a spot that would have been almost impossible for Maria to inject herself. This made it necessary to conduct a detailed toxicology analysis to determine what exactly caused the young mother's death, but this would take time. Search of the scene. When the police informed Joel that they needed to conduct a search of the house and asked for his consent, he became visibly anxious. He said that his wife was a very modest and private person and would not have liked anyone going through her belongings, adding that there was no need for it if she had simply decided to end her own life. However, the authorities disagreed, pointing out that the exact cause of death had not yet been determined and, therefore, all possibilities were being considered, including foul play. Additionally, they mentioned that a search warrant would be obtained soon anyway, so Joel could make things easier and faster by just giving his permission. Left with no other option, Joel reluctantly agreed. Although he clearly tensed up, it seemed he had intended to return home after the questioning to tidy up and possibly hide any evidence, as he had already tried to do with the pill bottle. Notably, the decision was made not to let him leave until all circumstances were fully investigated. The peculiarities began almost immediately when the scene was inspected. Joel had claimed that everything happened while he was in the shower, but the shower stall was completely dry. There were no puddles, no steam, and no droplets on the walls. Moreover, there was no wet towel anywhere that Joel could have used to dry off. In addition, the medicine cabinet was located in the same room where Joel had supposedly been showering. This meant that Maria would have had to quietly take the medication, consume a fatal dose, and then return the bottle back to the shelf without Joel noticing, all while he was just a few feet away. This scenario seemed improbable, but according to Joel, that's exactly how it happened. In the bedroom, tucked behind the leg of the bed, a police officer found a small intravenous butterfly catheter, the kind used to administer medication into peripheral veins. It appeared to have been tossed there as if someone hoped it wouldn't be discovered. This discovery immediately reminded investigators of the crinkly packaging Joel had been nervously fidgeting with. He must have put it in his pocket and under stress at the station, started playing with it in his hands. But the most significant find in the house was Maria's personal diary, which she had diligently kept for several years, filling it with her thoughts, emotions, and struggles. This diary became one of the key pieces of evidence in this complicated case. The diary of a betrayed wife. The young woman wrote about her deep fear of losing her husband, her desire to keep their family intact, and her concerns that the unhealthy atmosphere at home could negatively impact Alejandro and Valentina. She adored her children, who were the center of her world, and expressed doubts about whether she could ever forgive Joel for the way he had treated her. The more closely investigators examined the pages of the diary, the more it became clear that Joel was at the heart of Maria's anxiety and depression. It turned out that Joel had started seeing another woman a couple of years ago, and he wasn't just hiding it from Maria. He was practically living a double life, unwilling to give up either his wife or his lover. This situation caused Maria unbearable emotional pain. She wanted to keep the family together, so she didn't push Joel away, hoping he would come to his senses and return to her and the kids. At one point, she realized she couldn't handle the situation on her own and sought help from a specialist who prescribed antidepressants. However, Maria hardly took them, fearing side effects and the risk of dependency. Maria wrote about her plans to end her maternity leave. She was preparing intensely to pass the necessary exams to renew her medical license and return to work as a nurse anesthetist. But would a woman who was actively planning her future suddenly choose to end her own life? In the last month, however, the tone of her diary entries noticeably shifted. Maria no longer wrote about how much she was suffering or her wish to win back her husband. Instead, she expressed that it was time to let go of the past and move forward for the sake of her children and herself. She reflected on her readiness to give Joel a divorce, to let him go, but she still wanted to maintain a warm relationship with him. A friend's account. Next door, the house where the tragedy occurred, lived a woman named Adriana, who was close friends with Maria. When she heard the sound of emergency sirens late that night, she immediately felt something was wrong. The following morning, she saw several police cars outside and approached to ask what had happened. The news of her friend's sudden passing left her in shock, and she said she wanted to speak with the investigators because she had information to share. Adriana confirmed that Maria and Joel had been living separately for about 5 months, though he frequently visited to see his wife and kids. According to her, the family had once seemed happy, but around 2 years ago, things started to change dramatically for the 40-year-old Joel. He first lost a significant amount of weight and began hitting the gym regularly. Soon after, he bulked up quickly, suggesting to Adriana that he might have been using some enhancements. He also became more attentive to his appearance, changing his hairstyle and overhauling his wardrobe. As Joel's physical appearance transformed, so did his personality, but not for the better. Adriana described him as becoming arrogant, self-centered, and aggressive. She suspected he might have been using some kind of banned substances, but Maria avoided discussing this topic whenever it came up. These changes in Joel were evident on his social media accounts. Once a humble man, a devoted family guy, and a loving husband who shared photos of his loved ones, Joel now seemed preoccupied with self-admiration. He frequently posted revealing pictures that highlighted his muscular physique, often accompanied by suggestive captions hinting that he was open to new connections. According to Adriana, the family's problems started when Maria was pregnant with their second child. Joel was often absent, seemed irritated by everything, and openly spoke about wanting more freedom, expressing how the domestic life felt stifling to him. Maria tried to be understanding, hoping that he would change after their baby was born. But soon, she found out that Joel was seeing someone else, the other woman. It didn't take long to uncover the identity of Joel's new love interest. She was a young surgical nurse named Janet Aranda, who worked in the same hospital as Joel and was well acquainted with Maria. In 2018, while Maria was at home caring for their newborn daughter, Joel had taken a vacation to spend time with Janet. Maria eventually discovered the affair, but still made an effort to salvage their marriage. This led to a love triangle that persisted for 2 years. Janet's statement. Janet came to the station to give her statement as soon as she was requested, remaining calm and cooperative throughout. She confirmed that she had been in a relationship with Joel Pello for a couple of years and that he had been living with her for the past few months. From the beginning of their affair, Aranda knew that Joel was still legally married and had 2 children, and she was also personally acquainted with Maria. Despite the situation, Janet was unfazed, confident that Joel would eventually choose her over his wife. Janet stated that Joel never spoke poorly of his spouse, nor did he make any threats or hint at harming her. He only complained that Maria was refusing to grant him a divorce. She insisted that she had no direct communication with Maria and harbored no ill feelings towards her. On the night of the tragedy, Janet had a solid alibi. She was on shift at the hospital, which cleared her as a suspect. It took nearly 4 months to receive the comprehensive toxicology report, but the results were quite startling. The analysis revealed a mix of 7 potent substances in high concentrations in Maria's system. Each one in the quantities found could have been fatal to an adult, meaning there was no chance for her to survive. The most intriguing detail was that these drugs are typically used during surgical procedures for inducing anesthesia, putting patients in a medically induced coma, and providing pain relief. Joel had direct access to all of these substances at the hospital. He was well versed in their effects and knew exactly what dosage would be lethal. While this pointed to him having acted with intent, it was still circumstantial evidence and not enough on its own to charge him with a serious crime. The main suspect, who had remained free during the investigation, was arrested on the same day at Janet's home. Joel did not resist and appeared remarkably calm, but immediately requested a lawyer, as he was now officially facing charges related to premeditated criminal activity. With the new evidence, law enforcement decided to interview Janet once more, believing she knew more than she had initially let on. However, at first, she refused to speak or answer any further questions until she was offered a deal. In exchange for her full cooperation and a truthful account of everything she had previously withheld, she would be granted complete immunity from criminal charges and legal prosecution in this case. If she declined and the crime was proven, she could be implicated as an accomplice. Janet's testimony. Janet accepted the deal and revealed that Joel had been using certain substances which he would steal from the work. He often brought these drugs to her place and injected himself, slipping into a state of euphoria afterward. The substances had effects similar to prohibited drugs, and she managed to list 5 of them that she could recall. Interestingly, all of these were found in the deadly cocktail present in Maria's system. Janet's testimony, combined with the toxicology results, was enough to move the case to trial. Reconstructing the events of the fatal night. During her interview, Janet disclosed that on September 21, 2020, as Joel was preparing to visit his wife, he made a peculiar comment that Maria's future would depend on their conversation that evening. Joel had no interest in a divorce. He liked maintaining 2 households where he was welcomed by 2 women, both afraid to lose him. Additionally, a divorce would mean splitting assets with Maria and paying significant child support. Investigators theorized that Joel and Maria talked, but she remained firm in her decision to end the marriage. That's when he might have tricked her into ingesting something, and when she began to feel unwell, he offered to help by giving her an injection, one that was intentionally lethal. He acted decisively, administering a dose several times higher than what would be fatal, then waited until she stopped breathing before calling emergency services. This scenario explained the lack of struggle on Maria's body and the absence of any signs of the intimate encounter Joel claimed had occurred. If he had administered the injection to her left arm, It could have been interpreted as a voluntary act, but Maria was right-handed and wouldn't have been able to insert a catheter in such an awkward position on her dominant arm. The trial and verdict. The trial against Joel P. began in March 2023, 2.5 years after the tragic incident. It was a challenging case because the prosecution's arguments relied mainly on circumstantial evidence. Without Janet's testimony, Joel might have avoided any legal consequences. Another critical piece of evidence was Maria's personal diary, where her entries clearly showed she was not planning to end her life. She had plans for the future and was determined to move forward. The criminals attempt to cover his tracks. The suspect managed to dispose of the syringe he used to prepare a lethal cocktail for his wife, but he failed to notice what happened to the needle. It's likely that his oversight was due to his own impaired state, as he appeared to be under the influence of substances, which affected his judgment. Under the weight of the evidence, the defendant admitted to giving his wife an injection, but he claimed he was only trying to calm her down because she was acting irrationally. He continued to insist that she had taken an excessive dose of her prescribed medication, and the injection merely amplified its effects. But on its own, it wasn't the cause of her passing. Despite the best efforts of his defense team to argue his innocence, on March 30th, 2023, the 45-year-old Joel Pilo was found guilty of first-degree premeditated criminal conduct as well as tampering with evidence. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole only after serving a minimum of 30 years.